Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everybody. The session is open, and the first item on the agenda is the Commission statement on the EU homelessness strategy. And without further ado, I'll hand the floor to Commissioner Andor.
President, honourable members, the European Commission shares the view expressed by several groups that homelessness represents one of the worst forms of poverty and social exclusion and has devastating consequences for the persons themselves and for society as a whole. In the last years, poverty has risen in Europe, mainly in the more peripheral countries and regions, reaching unprecedented levels among those who are more vulnerable, such as homeless people. The rise of poverty has also affected wider layers of the society: young people, migrants and families with children. While planning and implementing policies confronting homelessness remains a matter of primarily national competence, the Commission fully supports the efforts of the Member States in this domain. The EU respects and promotes the right to social and housing assistance under the Charter of Fundamental Rights to combat social exclusion and poverty. The social investment package presented by the Commission in February 2013 calls on Member States to eradicate homelessness in a sustainable way by targeting the very different causes of homelessness, by implementing comprehensive, preventative, housing-led homelessness policies, and by revising their practices on eviction. The social investment package and its dedicated staff working document provide guidance on core elements of homelessness strategies and good practices to foster efficient policy making in the Member States. We will further disseminate this guidance in the forthcoming period, among others through a brochure. Homelessness strategies should not be limited to the provision of crisis interventions through shelter-based approaches. To address street homelessness, shelters are an immediate but only transitory solution. Studies show that shelter-based approaches are costly and they do not lead to getting homeless people out of their situation in a sustainable manner. Instead, Member States should pursue long-term, housing-led approaches. In other terms, make serious efforts for the rapid rehousing of homeless people and prevent the loss of permanent housing. We also need better coordination between housing policy actors and housing providers, and more engagement with private sector actors to boost affordable housing offer, for example through establishing social rental agencies. The Commission is also very attentive to the interactions between the state aid rules and housing policies. In the context of active inclusion strategies, a specific attention is moreover being paid to accompanying measures ensuring access to good quality social and health services. The social investment package calls upon the Member States to spend the European structural and investment funds in a more strategic way. These funds are indeed available to improve housing outcomes, and housing remains a funding priority for the financial framework 2014-20. The European Regional Development Fund may, for instance, finance integrated housing interventions and energy-efficient housing renovations. The European Social Fund can complement such integrated investments and can fund enhanced access to quality social services. Through Progress, the Commission finances innovative social projects such as Housing First Europe, which delivered evidence that homelessness can be successfully addressed through the rehousing of long-term homeless people. For the period 2014-20, €3.5 billion is allocated for the recently adopted Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived to provide non-financial assistance to the most deprived persons and explicitly address the food deprivation of homeless people, combining with activities aiming at their social inclusion. We are also aware that we need better quality, comparable data on housing, and that we should deepen our knowledge of homelessness and of its multiple root causes through EU-wide analysis. To this end, the Commission launched a pilot project on the right to housing, which will look into the link between housing evictions and homelessness. In the same vein, we will this year start developing, together with the OECD, a comprehensive database on social policies for housing. We also cooperate with the Dublin Foundation to monitor how housing quality influences social outcomes. The Commission encourages and supports exchanges on inclusive housing policies through the social open method of coordination and by organising thematic events. For instance, last November, we set up a workshop on integrated strategies for rehousing homeless people in the framework of the annual convention of the European Platform Against Poverty and Social Exclusion. The Commission is committed to working with experienced partners at European, national, regional and local level to support the Member States in preparing and further developing such national strategies. And finally, I would underline that effectiveness of homelessness-related provisions can also be addressed in the Commission's monitoring exercise within the framework of the European semester. Member States are therefore encouraged to report on their homelessness strategies in their national reform programmes. In this connection, the Commission has the opportunity to assess and to make, if necessary, proposals for a country-specific recommendation. I am looking forward to hearing the views of the Parliament. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'll hand the floor to the speakers on behalf of the groups. Mr. Uri first, please, for 2 minutes.
Monsieur, excusez-moi.
Mr. Uri, please, 2 minutes.
Igen, köszönöm a szót, elnök asszony.
President, on behalf of the European People's Party, I welcome this draft motion for a resolution as well as this debate, because homelessness is not a problem in just some member states. Rather, it is a problem across the European Union, although the problem might be particularly serious in certain countries. And I certainly agree with the Commissioner that homelessness is one of the most difficult problems linked to poverty, and that in recent years there has been a rise across the board in homelessness. And that is why we need a multiple political response, because the problem is so diverse. However, having said all of that, it is member states who are on the front line when it comes to dealing with this problem, although of course we should cooperate and coordinate closely at European Union level. Now, the Committee of Regions as well as the Economic and Social Committee have come together to work on drawing up a homeless strategy for the European Union, and I listened with interest to what the Commissioner had to say about future plans, because I don't think that they will suffice. The Commission now needs to come up with a strategy for closer coordination, and we need to cooperate more closely at European Union level. We believe that the Commission should set up a committee of experts, and we also think it would be a good thing if it could carry out comparative studies. Obviously, you would need comparable data in order to be able to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uri. I'll hand the floor now to Ms. Beres for 1.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. We're very pleased that this debate is being held this morning, even if we're debating a situation which is simply unacceptable, the fact that we have so many people homeless in Europe today, and this goes against the objectives that you set out in the EU 2020 strategy. Now, today we need to go further. We need this EU strategy for the homeless, because we do have the social strategy, but it isn't specific enough in this field. Now, we have a regulation on the European Social Fund. Through that, we would like you to provide us with indicators as to how the European Social Fund is being used. Now, through the legislation on the European Social Fund, it's up to member states to provide indicators which will give us a good overview of homelessness, so that we can better identify what's happening and to combat the problem through better social investment, and perhaps through a genuine strategy to deal with homelessness. Along these lines, we're worried about the problem of social exclusion, which may well be relegated to the back burner through the revision of the EU 2020 strategy. We don't think that that is substantially acceptable, nor in form is it acceptable. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to 2 points. Firstly, the criminalization of the homeless. This is a specific phenomenon that has to be accompanied very closely. We also need to take a close look at how to get a roof over their heads, to get people out of the situation of homelessness, and to improve their situation from a social perspective. Thank you very much, Mr. Rinaldi, for 2 minutes.
Presidente, cari colleghi.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, Commissioner Andor, I do not understand why the Commission has waited so long before bringing this strategy forward. Now, I'm glad we've now got a calendar and a timetable, but we need a clearer idea. The European Parliament called for this in 2011. The Committee of Regions, Economic and Social Committee also wanted that. In March of last year, there was an initiative by the Irish Presidency. There is a political consensus. There is a legal basis. There's nothing in this resolution which breaches the principle of subsidiarity. But above all, there is a problem. Citizens working in the European Union are becoming houseless, living rough in ever larger numbers. The Member States bear the main responsibility, but the Member States are not of one mind. There are those who have assistance for everyone, those who can restrict that to EU nationals, those who are looking only for their own country, those who criminalise or discriminate against people who are homeless living on the streets. It differs from country to country, but also from region to region, and there's much for the Commission still to do. We have heard that there are European funds there. There is good practice aplenty. There is good news, things which could spread. And we now have a map of the problem and Eurostat needs to provide us with statistics. It provides us with many other areas, but we don't have a clear focus on this, a clear fix on this. Nor do we have definitions which we could all subscribe to. We do not have common definitions. Commissioner, I think that we've got to get that strategy working sooner rather than later. We must get cracking on the subject to bring aid and succour to these citizens and these people who feel that the EU institutions are very remote and heartless. I think that's one way we can bring the institutions closer to people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Deli, 1.5 minutes.
Mes chers collègues, le Parlement va...
Colleagues, once again the Parliament is poised to adopt a resolution in favour of a strategy for the homeless. Now, this has taken 3 years. 3 years ago, the Parliament tabled a written resolution. We had a conference of ministers for housing, and we have repeatedly made overtures to the Commission since that time, but there's been a deafening silence from the Commission. What were you waiting for? Because the situation is deteriorating day in, day out. I mean, homelessness is a problem the year round, not just in winter, but the Commission has been sitting there in their ivory tower doing nothing. Look at the wave of evictions, for example, in Spain, for example, where the mortgage default law continues to breach all European guidelines, and that has led to more than 500,000 illegal evictions. And if we do not overhaul legislation on the repossession of housing, then it's the Troika which is responsible for this phenomenon. And that is why I want to remind colleagues that there is a principle at stake here, and we should call on all of them to vote in favour of the amendment to outlaw the criminalisation of the homeless in Hungary in particular, because being poor is not a crime and they should not be fined just for being poor. And that is why I'd invite our EPP colleagues to review their position, which has been to see this programme fail rather than adopt these measures. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of conclusion, if the Barroso Commission is not in a position to put in place a European strategy for the homeless before the elections, there might no bones about the fact, then I will call on European citizens to go to the ballot box and call into question this lack of solidarity.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tomasic, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Homelessness is indeed an insult to human dignity and has no place in Europe in the 21st century. But the trends show that we're not going in the desired direction and that an increase in homelessness is European reality at the moment. That's why I support the adoption of the strategy against homelessness, but it must be thorough and comprehensive. The increase in homelessness in the European Union is a consequence of a number of social problems, primarily the economic crisis. that we have yet to find an efficient response to. Let me give you a Croatian example. About a dozen families lose their homes on a daily basis because of debt enforcement or foreclosure. Over the past few years, Croatia has adopted a very strong and efficient legislative framework for debt enforcement, but has failed to include a social component. As a consequence of this fact that the state has sided with the creditors without taking into account the broader social picture, there is a growing number of Croatian families that have to fall back to the social welfare system. And as a result, the state now has to pay for their support in the effort to enforce the debts to private creditors. Of course, people who find themselves in financial problems have to face the consequences of their own actions, but also the banks have to accept business risk as something that is perfectly normal on the free market. The social systems of some other member states are under increasing pressure because of a growing number of migrants, but this is a completely different kind of problem, and this is why I think this strategy must be comprehensive and offer a...
Thank you, Ms. Tomasic. Ms. Zuber now. 1.5 minutes, Ms. Zuber. Thank you very much, Madam President. We know today that the number of homeless in Europe is underestimated because the people who really live on the streets are not being counted properly. We're not counting the people who have been evicted from their homes as a result of austerity measures and who don't have the economic means by which to pay the installments on their loans that they were paying previously. Now, although the phenomenon is different to other forms of homelessness, it needs to be counted alongside it. And some people are only managing to support themselves thanks to the solidarity of their friends and family, and we should not forget these people from the phenomenon of homelessness. Now, we can't talk about homelessness without thinking about the pivotal question of countries being forced to, or rather obliged to, meet the Human Rights Charter and to take into account people's fundamental rights in the field of homelessness. It's important to promote economic development, but not at the cost of deteriorating social conditions. And we need to remember that salaries have been cut, pensions and social support is being cut. If we don't talk about all of those other associated factors, it's simply laughable to be talking about a proper strategy to tackle homelessness. And from our perspective, we cannot include the economic semester, the European semester, in this, while the numbers of homelessness are still rising, which is simply a contradiction. Thank you very much, Ms. Zuber. The floor now to Mr. Clark, 1.5 minutes.
Homelessness leads to hopelessness, leads to criminality in all too many cases. It leads to social entrapment, where generation after generation are trapped in their poverty. It threatens to become the scourge of the age. There are many causes, but one of the keys is surely employment, and one of the answers to that is surely education. I regret to say that my own government is guilty of neglect. In 1945, they introduced a scheme whereby those with academic ability could attend grammar schools, previously the province of the wealthy. That offered a better way out, breaking the circle, the greatest social mobility scheme ever. It even benefited me, but later governments abolished it. We need an education system in Europe which caters for all abilities. We need academic schools, technical schools, commercial schools, sports academies, drama schools, universities and colleges of further education. We need industrialists to take on apprentices and to send them to university at their expense. We need those industrialists to invest in the poorer countries of Europe to help raise their standard. I do not believe in the mass migration of people across Europe promoted by this EU. We need settled communities, not footloose ones. We need people trained in the range of skills, and for them mainly to remain in their homeland, to develop prosperity there, raising their standard of living and banishing homelessness by their own efforts. And finally, Madam President, allow me to remark that I come from a country recently and disgracefully described by this Commissioner as a nasty country. And my final comment is, I do not wish to see poor countries in Europe.
Merci bien, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. The floor now to Mr. Obermeier. 1 minute.
Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you, Madam President. It's very sad when people in the richest regions of the world have to live on the streets because of social exclusion, because of illness and because of unemployment. Combating homelessness, of course, is a responsibility of Member States. It's a Member State competence. And the EU can do something on top of that. In Austria, we've had major difficulties because of growing indigent immigration from the south of Europe. And I believe this faces us with major challenges. Many people coming from other parts of the world with large families, there is not the place. And very often we are seeing aggression towards these immigrants and towards the homeless. And that tells us that we cannot just have blanket freedom of movement. We have to have a social union, but it doesn't seem to be on the cards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Obermeier. The floor now to Ms. Lope-Fontanier for 2 minutes.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you very much, Madam. Commissioner, today we are debating, and I'm sure we will approve, a resolution on the European homelessness strategy. And it is important that we deal with this strategy as quickly as possible. Notwithstanding the problems it has experienced in recent years, the European Union still has one of the world's best social protection systems. Nevertheless, homelessness has been on the rise and has changed people's lives. We have to provide assistance to indigents, to those who are homeless and those who do not have shelter. That is why local and regional authorities in Europe need to ensure that they gear their services to this new set of circumstances. No simple reason one reason why people find themselves without a roof over their heads or living in the streets, but there is one thing they all need, and that is they need assistance. You have people who've been living in the streets for years, and that has all kinds of implications. And then people who from one day to the next lose their jobs. The European Union needs to coordinate and needs to help member states to take the first step on the road to eradicating homelessness completely. So we need prevention. We need to ensure that our resources are geared to the present circumstances. We need to give priority to combating homelessness, as well as to a campaign which is designed to ensure that people can have the highest possible degree of personal autonomy. We have made considerable strides in recent years in combating poverty and social exclusion, but they are not enough. Member states need to be able to draw on the European Fund for the Most Deprived, which is a vital tool to help those who find themselves homeless. At present, it is not sufficient. There is not enough funding in the European Social Fund to help all member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lope-Fontanier. Ms. Costello, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, you're welcome here today to discuss this important issue. As has been said, homelessness is the manifestation of one of the worst forms of extreme material deprivation and poverty. And we know that the crisis has led to an increase in the levels of people experiencing poverty, and particularly homelessness. As rapporteur for the FEED programme, I have had insight into homelessness in many of the EU countries, and I want to commend the organisations which are delivering services. Particularly in my own constituency of Dublin, I know that the problem is reaching crisis levels, which is why I welcomed that just this week my colleagues on Dublin City Council rejected proposed cuts in the homeless budget and instead voted through an increase in the homeless budget. Commissioner, it's estimated that we have about 4 million homeless people in Europe, but yet at the same time we have no strategy, we have no data collection, we have no programme for the exchange of practice, and indeed we really have no programme to plot a common course to end the scourge of homelessness. The lack of a common statistical basis became apparent very much to me during the discussions on the FEED programme, and indeed the Commission's rejection of being able to adopt the ethos typology as a way of data collection and statistical analysis into the future. Commissioner, I think that it is a pity that the Commission has been so reluctant to address the whole issue of developing a homeless strategy, particularly when many Member States have been looking for it. We have already had a resolution. So we want to know what type of plans, Commissioner, you will have to follow through on the social investment package, and we will, as you say, have a real and meaningful housing-led approach to solving the scourge of homelessness, which is one of the worst forms of poverty and deprivation in the EU.
Thank you. Mr. Benyon, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It is extremely difficult to get decent statistics on the number of people who are homeless across the European Union. Yes, city councils do street counts of those who are sleeping rough, but it's a wider problem. We have people who are simply living on friends' sofas and relatives, people who are in temporary accommodation that's inappropriate. What we do know, however, is that the number has increased as a result of the economic crisis. I think, as Mr. Clark said, the problem is very, very strongly related to unemployment, and losing one's job can mean losing one's home. And being homeless renders it practically impossible for these people to participate in everyday life, either by entering the labour market, re-entering the labour market, or even having a proper family life. Now, this resolution recognises the fact that dealing with homelessness is up to Member States, and as it stands at the moment it does not cross the subsidiarity principle. However, I strongly oppose several amendments which do not respect subsidiarity, particularly in the area of tenancy law. Now, homelessness is a local issue, but we can bring together the experiences of all 28 Member States to work to combat it. We should ensure, for instance, that EU funds, such as the European Social Fund, can be used for programmes in this area. And I know in my constituency a number of local authorities use them very, very well in support services for the homeless. We also would be well advised to do some research work on the link between free movement and homelessness. And we should work together to gather data on this and the other facts relating to this issue. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Benyon.
Thank you, Mr. Benyon, and I'll call Ms. Kronberg for 1 minute.
Honourable members, the austerity focus of the economic crisis has not only resulted in massive unemployment but also in massive homelessness. The problems are related, but as long as there are not solutions to the employment problem, we have to focus also on homelessness as a separate issue. A strategy is needed. Many Member States have this as a priority. In some states it is a new problem and concern. A coordinated approach is necessary, and the EU has a responsibility to focus on this problem and to provide advice and strategy. There is a need, on the one hand, for emergency help, but also and above all for housing policies that provide more permanent solutions to homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Wojciechowski, for 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I think Madam Tomasic rightly said that homelessness actually hits dignity of every person, not only the homeless herself or himself, but the entire society. This should not be accepted in Europe of the 21st century. So we need a strategy. I fully support it. It's late, but better late than never. And I think that obviously we have to stick to sovereignty of every state in this regard, but we have to introduce certain minimum standards across Europe. We also need funds that would allow individual member states to finance the projects, because they are not always able to finance such projects themselves. Also, evictions are a huge problem. I think they should not happen in our member states. we cannot allow people to be evicted based on a decision by a court and forced to live in the streets, because it really hits dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pashka, for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you for the floor, dear Chair, dear Commissioner. The worsening economic situation in Europe and the increasing influx of migrants have emphasized the problems of homelessness in a number of member states. Surviving in winter month on a street without the possibility of sleeping in a dry and warm bed is demanding even for a healthy man, and it is even worse for mothers with children to end up in such a situation. Therefore, the social system must be ready to register such cases and provide such persons with necessary aid. Although our existing mechanisms of providing aid to people in need have been granting assistance to homeless people as well, they are not able to quickly react to the increase in those cases. Therefore, I think we shall check the possibilities of increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of our mechanisms so that they can provide better aid in such cases.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Pashka. I now call Ms. Bastos for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, Commissioner, the problem of the homeless in Europe is a serious social problem. It's worrying that we have this form of poverty and social exclusion, and it really calls upon us to act and do something. This action has to be urgent and it has to be effective. The European strategy for homelessness needs to reach all of those that need support in achieving the right to housing, a dignified life, and all of the things that go with it: employment, social protection and a family life. This is a problem which has various different facets. It requires preventive action and it requires quick response. In most member states, we've seen an increase in poverty levels and the number of people living on the streets, which goes against the EU 2020 strategy objectives. And this is something that Europe needs. It needs a strategy to provide a reinforced approach so that member states can give an effective response as is required to this extremely serious problem. And it's only by working together with the member states of the European Union that we will manage to reduce the number of people living on the streets and hopefully eradicate this phenomenon so that nobody has to sleep on the streets because of a lack of alternatives. Thank you.
Merci, Thank you very much. Mr. Darden for 1.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, European strategy to combat homelessness was urgent 3 years ago, as my report indicated, on tackling poverty, and it's even more the case today, since the crisis has clearly exacerbated the problem. It has many facets. Obviously, supply and demand, the sufficient number of houses being available is important as well. But apart from that, there are other factors: unemployment, a loss of purchasing power. There's a need to reinvest in Europe to get growth going again. There is a crisis in many professions. It means that we're having to keep up social expenditure. We need strong, robust policies of social inclusion. We have the European Social Fund. We have the FEAD for the most deprived, and they have to be rejigged to to put the focus on that area. But there's not enough money in the kitty, even there. Now, the resolution on homelessness. I would insist that policies of social inclusion and social protection, relaunching employment, have to be pushed ahead very vigorously. As a mayor, I know that much of this can be done at the grassroots level, and we must see an end to the policy of heartless austerity. I believe that society, companies, local authorities have much they can do to promote social inclusion, and that's where we must see.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Goulart. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. I just wanted to say that you will find that you have the support of this chamber, although there aren't many of us here. But I do think that you are taking a risk with this strategy, because the way people interpret the European Union these days is such that subsidiarity comes to mean that the authorities simply do not shoulder their responsibilities. Now, clearly, we cannot have an inclusive policy if we're looking at people on the streets in the strictest sense of the term, but there are people who do find some way of getting by or managing, perhaps living in a caravan, so people perhaps living without dignity. And as the president of the group dealing with that subject in this parliament, I want to encourage you, please don't be put off by people going on about subsidiarity, because this is an issue which pertains to fundamental rights, and fundamental rights is a prerogative of the European Union. It's enshrined in our charter, and we'll have problems looking ourselves in the face in future if we don't. Thank you very much, Ms. Goulart. I now call Ms. Essayah for 2 minutes.
Arvoisa puhemies, hyvä komissaari.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, homelessness is one of the most serious problems in a Europe in crisis. Now, there are lots of healthcare and social consequences of homelessness. It's very difficult to define homelessness precisely. It's a phenomenon with various different facets. In fact, over the course of history, homelessness has changed, and it's always been very difficult to measure and to quantify homelessness precisely. We talked about homelessness in 2012, and here at the European Parliament we called for an overarching strategy at European level, and I am one of those that believes that we need to focus on the responsibility of member states and to help them coordinate and enhance their national approaches, and to do that we need best practice. We have seen many member states putting into place strategies against homelessness, and some work. In Finland, where I'm from, we've managed to reduce homelessness in the medium and short term by providing quick housing and quick access to social housing. We've also thereby led to a reduction in the use of hospital services and healthcare services as a result. We've also helped people get back into society once they have had access to this social housing. So there are strategies that can be implemented that have an impact. I do think we need to preempt these problems more, prevent problems, rather than focusing our efforts on simply building provisional housing for people who need it. Of course, when it comes to housing problems, it's better to subsidize access to existing housing than trying to house people in makeshift accommodation. Thank you.
Mrs. Gens, 1 minute. Thank you very much, Madam President. I listened very closely to what the Commissioner was saying about the plans for the future. Now, of course, this is the tail end of this Parliament, and we've taken a long time to direct our focus to combating poverty. This has become much worse because of the crisis, and the Commission has said that they intend to conduct an investigation and a survey in order to get the scale of the problem. And of course there are fundamental rights dimensions here because of the implications of a legal nature. Now, of course, that takes you into member state competence in the area of homelessness, but a common strategy would help local authorities, and criminalisation is a major difficulty where I think there is a need now for EU level intervention. The ERDF, regional fund, the social fund can be deployed in order to get results, and I hope that we get a partnership with the member states.
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Chazimarkakis for 1.5 minutes.
Madam President, we're talking about policy for the homeless, and this is a positive development, so that there are measures in countries which have been affected by the crisis, such as Greece, where the phenomenon of homelessness is hitting crisis proportions. But there are dangers here and pitfalls going forward, because we are looking now at measures which are only predicated on a one-year period, and the problems are going to come to emerge in the fullness of time as people are unable to meet the payments on their mortgages and so on. And clearly, if there is not some form of insurance for those people, we are going to see more and more evictions, more and more foreclosures, and they're going to feed the ranks. They're going to feed the ranks of the homeless. And so this is a problem which is not just an ad hoc thing. I believe that things may take a tragic turn for the worse in Europe, and this means there will be no way out for families in Greece. Now, who is going to pay for the so-called red loans, which we talk about, which are going to become ever more urgent with the passing of time? We cannot simply have 1 year safety nets. It's got to be much longer than that, so that people have the necessary guarantees, so that they can have a roof over their head, even at a time when their purchasing power is going down. In German, could I thank Commissioner Andor for the role he has played when it comes to combating homelessness, and for things he said which have had an echo in Germany in particular.
Madam. Thank you very much. I now call Ms. Bucic. 2 minutes.
Poštovane kolegice I kolege.
Dear colleagues, I am aware of the fact that the economic crisis has hit the European and the global economy hard. We are hostage to this crisis, but we should not reduce or cut programs aimed at reducing poverty. Many EU countries are now implementing austerity measures, but these measures should not affect the basic social needs of the population. Homelessness is one of the greatest problems, not only in Europe but in the world. Although we have studies showing the causes of homelessness and poverty, the debate such as this one today is always welcome, because we have to keep reminding ourselves that causes of poverty are deeply embedded in the very foundations of our society. One of the most blatant manifestations of poverty is definitely homelessness, and although this is in the jurisdiction of the member states, the European Union has to define a clear strategy for fighting this problem. The EU institutions and the Commission in particular should encourage clear policies that are aimed at solving this problem. All the institutions have to collaborate, work together at all levels, from the EU level down to the local level. If we create a network of all the stakeholders, we would be able definitely to implement more successfully all the strategies and policies. It is up to the member states to devise preventive measures to assist those who are at risk, because they know what the situation is in the sphere of homelessness. And this is the only way, by creating this network and coordinating our efforts, that we will be able to eradicate this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call Ms. Regner for 1 minute. Thank you very much indeed, President. Commissioner, shelter is a basic need, and of course member states are responsible, national level, regional, local authorities first and foremost, but it is only right and proper that the Commission now become involved in debating a strategy, and I want to make a couple of points which strike me as particularly important. First of all, the criminalization of those who find themselves homeless. Now, we have seen an increase in that phenomenon in many member states, and that should be criticized in the strongest possible terms. Secondly, people living in the streets should be given adequate services. Now, the Commission knows that it has to do so as part of its youth guarantee, and the third issue is prevention, because it is of paramount importance that we see to it that people do not fall into the trap of homelessness, and that is why we need care facilities for people who do lose their homes and who are the weakest in our societies. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ms. Sonic for 2 minutes.
Doświadczenie bezdomności.
The experience of homelessness is a trauma, psychological trauma, but also physical trauma. And we all know that to be able to live with a dignity is to have a roof over our head. I think that our actions should focus on prevention, and rightly so. I think prevention should be the focus for all member states. We should not allow such situations to happen. We should not allow for such a trauma to realize itself. It's better to act before than have to or be obliged to act when the situation is already very difficult. So better safe than sorry. And in this regard, I think that member states have a lot of things they could potentially do. Obviously, governments can do a lot to improve the situation. Better housing policy, focusing on economic aspects, employment, and countries that are potentially at risk, that had problems in the past, should focus on such issues more. Non-governmental organizations often work with such people, especially in very difficult winter periods. NGOs that work across Europe are very much needed. Their work is very much needed. However, the funds that they have at their disposals are very often limited. NGOs themselves cannot take full responsibility for solving this very complex problem. Definitely they need steps that should be taken by individual member states, and political will is needed to make sure that a pan-European strategy is implemented, a real strategy that many of you have spoken about in this room. Many ideas in these resolutions are indeed very good, and I hope that the European Parliament will say yes to them, especially the points that focus on prevention when it comes to homelessness. I hope that governments across Europe will take relevant actions to make sure we cooperate better.
Thank you, Mr. Sonik. I now give the floor to Ms. Garria Zabal for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner Andor. There is a consensus at all levels in this chamber, at all stages of the debate, on the need for a strategy for homelessness, and that means that it's incomprehensible when we look at the Commission's action in this field. The number of people and whole families that are being evicted onto the streets is just increasing, and we cannot turn a blind eye to this. This is our opportunity to demonstrate that European solidarity does exist. It's not just empty words proffered without action. The disastrous management of this crisis has had a devastating impact on many European societies. The provision of housing is essential, and having no shelter is one of the most cruel forms of social exclusion. We cannot lose any more time, Commissioner. We have to put into practice this strategy. Please do it.
Thank you. I now call Mr. Poupakis for 2 minutes.
Madam President, Commissioner, in the Europe of 2014, homelessness is becoming a real scourge. This had been erected as a top priority, and yet we're seeing it becoming ever worse, particularly in the countries which are under the programmes and the austerity programmes and the memorandums. This is a particular problem for the heads of households and households in general, who are suddenly they are completely at a loss for what to do. This is made worse because of the fact that people are paying more taxes because of the austerity programmes as well, meaning that hundreds of thousands of people are now living with the very real threat of eviction and of being put out onto the street. Nor do they have access to the fundamental frontline services. Prevention is better than the cure, because for every €1 spent, you are saving damage running into of 2.5 times bigger than that. So prevention is better than the cure, and we must have rapid action, swift action, so that we can have, and special attention must be placed on those who are vulnerable and are facing eviction and foreclosure. Greece is a particular case. We do not have the network of social housing of the kind which would be required. And I believe that investing there will bring real benefit to people concerned and to society at large, and indeed to the economy at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We move now on to Catch the Eye, and please respect your speaking time. A lot of people asking for would like to be able to give it to everyone, so please respect your allotted speaking time. Mrs. Zaborska, first of all, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Madam.
I will support mnohých odporúčaní z predloženého návrhu uznesenia.
I will support the resolution even though I have serious doubts about the usefulness of many points in it. I don't believe it possible to have a common strategy against homelessness for all the member states, just as it's not possible to introduce a common minimum wage or pensions or a common social security system. And the reason being always the same, vast differences among the member states in their economic performance, their labor productivity, or the traditions of state administration, and also the level of family relationships in the member states. I do agree, though, that the competence for solving the situation lies solely with the member states. European legislation should not deal with the matter of homelessness at all, because the only outcome would be a series of equalizing statistics and useless recommendations, and that would definitely not help the homeless.
Ms. McGuinness.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Madam President. Homelessness is extremely visible. I walk past a homeless person in Brussels every time I walk along Place Luxembourg, so it's not as if we don't see this problem, but it's complex. And I think some of the issues have been mentioned here in relation to evictions, which are new to the stage to some extent, but there are many other issues that cause homelessness, like domestic violence, poverty, unemployment, mental health issues. And we have a lot of information from the European Federation of National Organisations dealing with this. And the research is saying to us very clearly that a housing-led approach is a better solution to the problem than anything else. But it requires all the stakeholders to accept that, and it also requires it to be implemented. And it is happening in some cases. We, for example, in Ireland are beginning to talk about a new build programme, but they have to be in the right locations. We might have properties available, but in the wrong locations. But I'm glad we're having this debate. Thank you.
Merci, Madame McGuinness. Madame Costa.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Costa, please.
Signor Commissario,
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. This is a moral and a political challenge to which the EU must rise. These are fundamental rights, and we must keep up the fight against social exclusion and poverty. We have the social fund, we have the structural funds there as well. The resolution we adopted goes back to 2011, and the intervening period since then, we've been looking for a targeted EU strategy which would make inroads into the problem. There was the Housing First conference in Lisbon in 2013. We need the facts and figures that we are required to get a handle on the problem, because this is bearing down on families and households. There are structural difficulties, and this has acquired crisis proportions. Housing-led is a very important thing which has come from ACES. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Costa. Everyone. Vuljanic, please. Mr. Vuljanic.
President,
well, the homeless people are not homeless because they decided to be homeless. They are not poor because they're homeless. They're homeless because they're poor. These are people who lost their jobs, lost their prospects, lost their future. That's not what they wanted. This is a humiliation visited upon us by this system, the system that we call neoliberal, for reasons that are unclear to me. As we debate here, people lose homes, and the only strategy that might help them is a strategy to eradicate poverty. There is no reason for the European Union of poor people to exist, just as there is no point in a state of a poor people. After centuries of tempestuous history, there is no call for people to have no future, no education, no homes, no food on their table. This should be the first and foremost goal of the European Union. And
thank you, Mr. Vionnet. Mr. Bruns, please.
Yes, the cause of homelessness that is unmentionable by the silent conspiracy of liberal consensus is immigration and asylum. Every person or family entering a country adds to the demand for housing by one. If there are homeless among the indigenous population, a house provided for a new arrival is a house denied to an existing resident. The decision takers, MEPs, MPs, local councillors, are not among the homeless. Indeed, most of them can't count any homeless among their circle of acquaintances. To them, the homeless are just statistics and not real people. Decision takers feel terribly generous for granting a home to a newcomer, but funnily enough, they don't feel mean for denying one to an existing resident. We heard this morning from UKIP that it was opposed to mass immigration. However, its leader said recently, "We want immigration, we welcome immigration." In 2010, he said the UK needed 250,000 every year. Thank you.
Monsieur Brons, Madame
Thank you very much. Mrs. Jastrzębska, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The economic crisis means that homelessness has become a very dramatic reality in almost every member state. It is about social exclusion, very dramatic to the people who are homeless themselves, but also to the society as a whole. The Commission and the Parliament have been trying for years to counter this problem, also to use the European funds. 2014-2020 provides for 3.5 billion euro. However, this is still not enough to eliminate the problem, but we cannot accept the fact that whatever we do doesn't seem to bring any results. It seems it is not possible anymore to eliminate the homelessness that we wanted to do 3 years ago. I'm not even sure if we can achieve it by 2020. The member states seem to be failing to understand how to implement this policy properly. The Federation working in favor of the homeless people is saying that the proposal of the European Commission...
Thank you, Mrs. Jastrzębska. Sorry for coming in like that. Mrs. Petrovic, please.
Prema procjenama nevladinih organizacija,
according to some estimates of NGOs, there are about 3 million homeless people and about 70 million poor people in Europe. In our group, we have always advocated the rights of the poor people, people who have been stripped of some of their rights. But it seems that we have been wrong in the way we have gone about it because of the lack of results. Homelessness and poverty are not personal choice. We have to protect those people. We have to make sure that this problem is solved, and solved soon, so that in a couple of years' time we will not have to be dealing with it again. I have also spoken about the problem of criminalization of the homeless people, and Commissioner Reding has promised that there will be increase.
Mr. Murphy, please.
Thank you, President. The crisis of homelessness is a graphic illustration of the fact that Europe is moving rapidly in the wrong direction in terms of the conditions of people. Any given night, up to 500,000 people are homeless, and that figure is on the rise. In France, up 50% since 2001. Portugal and Spain, up 30% since the start of the crisis. In Greece, up. In Ireland, in Dublin, some estimates saying a trebling of homelessness over the past year. Multiple reasons for homelessness, no question, but let's name a fundamental cause behind many of them, which is the austerity proposed, supported by the Commission and the governments all across Europe, resulting in declines in income, resulting in evictions like in Spain, resulting in the dismantling of social supports. Saying that the right to a home is a real right means saying it takes priority over the rights of the bankers and the landlords to profiteer. It means investing in shelters, in homes and in social supports. Thank you.
Monsieur Protasevich.
Mr. Protasevich, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, under the previous term of office, I worked on the declaration on how to counter the homelessness problem. So I'm happy to see that we are debating about it right now. We are aware this is a very difficult problem to solve, but we are politicians. We cannot say that we are basically hopeless, that we cannot do anything. We have to do something. That is why the European Commission should focus on the exchange of best practices from every member state. From Brussels, we cannot be efficient if we do not support the best practices and help to implement them, because there are some solutions that already our governments have tested in practice and they are working. We have to involve NGOs because they are very experienced in fighting the problem. So there are instruments we can use, like the European Social Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Protasevich. Mrs. Kadenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, the problems we've listed on several occasions, but there's just one point that I'd like to focus upon now, namely access to the healthcare system. We know that often homelessness is connected to health problems, and often the cause of ill health is homelessness and vice versa. As such, we need to make sure that the homeless are getting access to the healthcare system, which they're not at the moment. People losing protection are having increased difficulties to get seen by doctors and by GPs, and it's very difficult to accommodate them in any kind of medical facility if people don't have homes. As such, in the EU strategy for the homelessness, we need to pay close attention to how the healthcare system will deal with homeless people if they aren't covered by the healthcare system otherwise.
Thank you, Mrs. Kadenbach. Mr. Meltzer. Sleeping rough, President, without electricity, without housing, that life as a homeless person is very hard. And of course, if you do not have a bank account, it's very difficult to get a house and a job. There are many people who are begging, and in the United Kingdom, in London for example, very often people who have got degrees are unable to pay for decent housing. And we now have the phenomenon of the working poor in Europe. And we have a major problem of poverty migration, with Roma, for example, moving around to other countries and imposing great strains on provision of social services. We need to combat mass unemployment. Work has got to pay. It's got to be decent work so that people can have an income, have a bank account and find their way back into society. Thank you. Mrs. Toia, please.
Del nostro incontro, di questa discussione.
Well, this is a very ambitious debate. It's a strategy, of course, which will then have to take the form of tangible steps, and you can't simply have a confusion between our wishes and responsibility to local authorities, and that is why more has to be done, and this is what has been called for by colleagues from my own group as well as from other groups, because this is a highly specific phenomenon. It's something that has changed over time, and that is why if we wish to intervene effectively, we need to know what we're talking about, because people lose their jobs and there are things that can be done. And another feature on which you could work is look at people who wish to become self-sufficient and are able to do so if they get a hand up. So we need to look at how we should act, and we should take robust action, and there's certainly unanimity in this Parliament on that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Toia. Commissioner, please.
President, honourable members, thank you very much for this very constructive discussion. I believe it provides a lot of support for the Commission at this time when we are approaching a mid-term review of the Europe 2020 strategy, which is the main strategic framework for the European Union, not only for the Commission, to achieve smart, sustainable and inclusive growth, and within that context fight poverty and fight all forms of poverty, including homelessness. We committed, together with the Member States, to a visible reduction of poverty in the European Union. We ensure that in the meantime the new multi-annual financial framework emerges in a form which can support these objectives, and I am very grateful for the support of the Parliament, because you also know that quite a few Member States opposed to have a robust EU budget, opposed the establishment of the financial instrument to support the most deprived, and some also opposed a minimum share for the social fund. And obviously without these key elements, without a robust EU budget, we would have a much smaller chance in this fight. We also came forward last year with the social investment package, which actually provides a framework for the Member States to improve the effectiveness of their social policies, and the Commission under this new framework has been playing a more robust coordinating role than before. When this was adopted, this House strongly supported and appreciated that it goes beyond some of the expectations. For example, it establishes the knowledge bank to bring together the best practices and share those among the Member States, and in that context we already received strategies from countries like Denmark or the Czech Republic which follow the spirit and the guidance of this social investment package in the area of tackling homelessness. And we can use this, and this will be the first semester in the cycles of the European semester and economic governance, when we can take advantage of the social investment package, including what it says on homelessness. We have also called Member States not just to implement the Europe 2020 strategy, but the 1998 active inclusion strategy. So on this basis, a lot of progress would need to be seen already in the area of homelessness if the implementation within the Member States would work. Now, why don't we see progress? Why, in terms of poverty, we see movement in reverse direction rather than progress? It's not because Member States would not want to work with the Commission to improve the effectiveness of social policy and tackle homelessness. It is because of the Eurozone crisis, as you know very well. I'm glad I heard from quite a few members of this House references to the importance of tackling the Eurozone crisis and connecting the macroeconomic agenda with the social outcomes. But the Commission already put forward a communication on the social dimension of the EMU. This is again another concrete step to ensure that economic governance reflects better the social outcomes. Poverty, inequality have been integrated in a new scoreboard, which will allow a better focus in the European semester. But indeed, without improving the crisis response, a more systematic, more robust response in order to get out of this Eurozone crisis, of course, we are facing very, very serious limitations and very little hope that the social conditions would improve quickly. Banking regulation, which several speakers also pointed to, are important. So not everything is possible to be integrated in any kind of strategic document on the level of the Member States or the EU, which has a consequence, which has a bearing or a relevance for the social outcomes, including homelessness. It's also very important to ensure that macroeconomic policies, financial sector regulation, become aware and more conscious about the social dimension. Resources, financial resources and implementation capacity are key. We have to announce the goals and outline the way forward at the level where the resources and the implementation capacity exist. I believe the EU funds, which are, as you know well, implemented in shared management, for the next period, 2014-20, allow the Member States to allocate financial resources in a more targeted manner for ending homelessness. The Commission prepared guidance on how these funds, in particular the European Social Fund, support the homeless people, social inclusion and employability in various ways, such as through supporting services, training centres and social economy programmes. These programmes are of benefit to individuals as well as the communities. So practically everything what has been mentioned in terms of concrete action in this discussion, the Commission has already doing and has already encouraged the Member States to do in order to tackle homelessness. To the specific UK dimension of this discussion, let me just say that the British experience in the area of tackling homelessness is one of those which we have been promoting. The Housing First strategy, especially as it was implemented under the former Mayor Ken Livingstone, indeed made a lot of progress in the UK to eliminate or reduce very significantly homelessness. And this has been very explicitly mentioned in our documents. So I very much regret that Mr. Clark has been very kind of inaccurately informed about what I was saying in the British media about the country, because I definitely never said that the UK is a nasty country. It's not my words. Unfortunately, some newspapers reported this in an inaccurate way and in the wrong context, and it's also untrue that the Commission would be, so to speak, promoting mass migration. The Commission wants to ensure that the freedom of movement is respected in the European Union in all countries, and this was a subject of the debate yesterday, and I think it created a lot of clarity in a sometimes confused debate. We would, from the side of the Commission, be very happy to continue working with the members of the House. We would like to see more members of the European Parliament in our meetings, like the People Experiencing Poverty conference. I know it's sometimes MEPs face time shortages, but we have a number of conferences, including the Convention of the Platform Against Poverty, including a forthcoming conference on social innovation, where related issues can be discussed. We work with the NGOs. We fund a large number of NGOs who are active in this area, and we remain committed to this cause. We have been funding very innovative approaches, like, for example, the cooperation of railway companies to tackle homelessness, and if there is need for information about this, of course, we are ready to provide, and we are really strongly committed to maintain the anti-poverty dimension of the Europe 2020 strategy, which was mentioned by Madam Beres. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Andor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Andor. 5 motions for resolutions to close the debate. Wind up the debate. It's now closed, and the vote will be taken today at noon. This takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is the Commission statement on non-discrimination in the framework of sexual and reproductive health and rights. I give the floor to the Commission, and that's Commissioner Kallas.
Madam President, honourable members, the Commission fully recognises that each and every individual has the fundamental right of access to high-quality health care. Despite the work done and results achieved over the years, problems of inequalities and discrimination sadly still remain in Europe. We therefore need to continue and increase our efforts to eliminate all forms of inequalities and discrimination, including discrimination based on gender and sexual orientation. We must also continue to actively promote equality between men and women. With the aim of contributing towards a healthier and fairer Europe, the Commission organised an event on this theme last October, and will convene a conference in March on this issue. Health must be for all. Everybody should have access to good quality health care, regardless of gender, age, race, sexual orientation, disease, social status, education or country of residence. Health free of prejudice and discrimination, and with full respect to all beliefs and behaviours, calls for the involvement of the whole of society. It involves, for example, education, justice, social affairs, in short, all the different constituent areas that collectively make up our societal models. Sexual and reproductive health forms, of course, part of the health status of the population and equally needs to be considered within a perspective of equality and non-discrimination, both inside and outside the European Union. We must strive to do better. For example, it is unacceptable that even if comparatively low in the European Union, maternal mortality is still a problem and is significantly high within some vulnerable groups. It is unacceptable that female genital mutilation still exists in the EU as well as in the wider world. It is unacceptable that many forms of violence, which clearly have an impact on health, are still deemed in certain quarters to be justified by custom, tradition, culture, privacy, religion or honour. President, honourable members, let me finish by reiterating that the European Commission stands amongst the staunchest opponents of inequality and discrimination in all its forms. Whilst respecting the national competencies of the Member States, the Commission actively supports governments to ensure that health systems have the capacity to deal effectively with health needs and that equality and fairness are championed at every opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now for the groups. Mrs. Bauer, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you. With full respect to the Article 168 of the Lisbon Treaty, the EPP Group is standing firmly on the position that sexual and reproductive health and rights are under subsidiarity and as such belong to the competence and responsibility of Member States.